Hey, and welcome to a new video of mine. Today we will dive into the medieval Finland. We will also cover a bit of religion, trading, and politics. Are you ready? Let's start with Göteborg. Catholics from the west and Orthodox from the east. Both got influence in Finland during 12th and 14th centuries. Slowly Finnish people would expand away from the coast as well when the coast started being full. Catholics and Orthodox fought over Finland till 1323 when the peace treaty of Göteborg was made. This gave Sweden just a bit of the modern Finland's lands. Ranks. In the Swedish reign of Finland had five types of people: nobles, priests, merchants, peasants, and those who were too poor to even have a rank. Nobles and priests were at the top of the hierarchy and they could enjoy the life to the fullest. Peasants worked hard to get bread on the table, though a peasant had a lot better than their servants, people who needed to work for the peasants. The husband was in charge of the house till his death, when the power would transfer to his wife. If the wife remarried, the power would go back to the husband. Whoever has the power was to be obeyed by everyone in the house, including wife, kids, and the servants, of course. In Europe, the church and nobles often owned the land, but it is different in Finland, as the land was owned by the peasant living there. Crusades. Crusades from Europe came to Sweden, and from there they traveled to Finland. East also had some influence in Finnish religion. The modern Finnish words are mixed, and some are from the east and some are from the west. Finland eventually turned Catholic and part of the Western Europe. Finland was scarcely populated, that the Crusades did not reach the whole of Finland, but it spread amongst the people anyways. Conquering. 1293, Swedes started a crusade to Finland. This was the third crusade ever going to Finland. In Karelia, people converted to Christianity pretty easily, but in the east, Novgorod was a pain in the ass. Eventually, the peace treaty of Göteborg was formed and the war between Swedes and Novgorod ended. Bishop. The bishopric of Turku covered everything else in Finland except Lapland. Bishop was most likely the most powerful human in Finland at the time. The bishop even had direct connections to the Pope, who leads the Catholic Church. Buildings. On the 13th century, churches were first built in Finland. Churches were built on areas that were the easiest to access, so everyone was able to practice Christianity. Finland had lots of trees and houses commonly used wood, which was logical that churches also used wood. Stone churches were later built, but they were a lot more expensive and started appearing around the 15th century, around 200 years after the first wooden churches were made. Monasteries. There are monasteries all across Europe. In Finland, monasteries were quite different than the southern European ones. In Finland, monasteries were in cities and not isolated. Monasteries had both women and men. It was a great way for a woman to get an education. Monasteries were a huge help in translating books to Swedish. There was no Finnish books because the Firthen Finnish language had not been invented yet. Monasteries also took care of ill people and farmed crops. Elections. In year 1362, Finland was invited to vote for the Swedish king. Now that Sweden recognized Finland as part of it and took it seriously, its power also rose in Finland. Earlier peasants paid tax to the churches, but now they started paying for the king as well. Castles. For Finland and Sweden, it was important to build castles on the eastern border, because of the threat of Novgorod. Castles were, of course, a lot easier to defend. Most of the taxes in medieval Finland and Sweden was spent into upkeep of castles and soldiers. The Kalmar Union. The King of Sweden was chosen via election, which led into him not having that much power. The noble fought over the throne politically. Margaret I of Denmark created the Kalmar Union that Sweden also wanted to join. At the start of the union, they lived at peace, but then after about half a decade it all started to fall apart. Countries. Near the Gulf of Finland there were lots of different countries. For example, there was the Holy Roman Empire that covered the now known Germany and Netherlands. Along with that, a new country was born when Poland and Lithuania united. The country was called Poland-Lithuania, not very creative. This is also when Lithuania joined Christianity. The Baltics were otherwise still non-Christian, so there was the Teutonic Order trying to convert them. Law. In Finland's first ever Swedish laws were created on the 14th century. Before that, Finland had own laws in different places of Finland. Now with the new law, if someone was sanctioned, the sanction would be divided evenly with the king, victim and the town. East. Finnish citizens mainly lived in the south and coasts. Finns did not instantly change into Christianity, but had its own Baltic Finnic paganism alongside Christianity, though every citizen was still required to attend to church at least once a year. Slowly people started converting into Christianity. In Christianity there are saints. Every saint has its own day. If it was a day of a saint, it was illegal to work, and if caught working, you would be punished. Food. In Finland people mainly ate grain, since it was grown a lot in Finland. For dinner, it was common to have bread and mild ale. Berries were also very common during summers. Butter, meat and fish were salted if you could afford salt. Salt would make the meat last longer, but it also was expensive, so some people dried their foods. Eating meat in general was rare and only reserved for special occasions. On these times, people usually slaughtered their own cattle for food. Fasting. During the Catholic Church's time, you would also fast in Finland. Fish was very common since it was allowed during fasting. The church banned raw foods, and most of the things were not allowed to eat during Wednesday, Fridays, and Saturdays. Clothing. In Finland, it is cold during the winters, so clothing had to be warm. So they made jackets from thick wool and leather. The common people had to be happy with their own Finnish lamb wool, when rich could afford buying more fancy clothing and in general spend more on aesthetics, since they had access to more money and markets outside of Finland. During summer, people did not really wear shoes, but in the winter it was needed. The common people used shoes made of tree bark, when the rich used leather boots. Traveling. The common people walked pretty much everywhere. Using horses was expensive, and the common peasant couldn't afford one. If the distance was long, you could use a boat. During the winters, it was easier to transport goods, cause the lakes were frozen and you could use a sledge to quickly get across. Also, the roads were not straight and quite narrow, so it was hard to transport during summer. Birth. The Hanseatic League was born when European market towns started being able to protect themselves and did not need the Holy Roman Empire's protection, which they paid high tax for. The market towns formed an alliance of trade and protection. The biggest towns at the time were Lübeck and Hamburg. The towns were still independent but just defended each other and monopolized trade. Reign. The Hanseatic League grew influence and were in a good position where they could affect even kingdoms and other rulers. The Hanseatic League perfected trading, and it was so effective that it made the market towns that were part of the alliance very rich. This attracted the attention of many rulers, but the ones who were foolish enough to try to benefit from it were blocked from trade if they threatened the Hanseatic League. The Hanseatic League also had lots of money, so they could hire mercenaries to fight for them. Denmark. During 1361, the Danish king Valdemar IV conquered Visby, that was part of the Hanseatic League, but for some reason the others didn't start the war. They only started the war when Valdemar IV threatened to force Hanseatic League's fishermen out of Denmark. The war was awful for Denmark, but after a peace treaty, Denmark was allowed to keep Visby anyways. The Netherlands. After the Dutch invented limited companies and the stock market, the Hanseatic League started losing power as Amsterdam in the Netherlands started becoming cheaper. Eventually, in 1441, the Hanseatic League let Dutch traders trade in the Gulf of Finland. Eventually, Amsterdam would overthrow Lübeck, Hamburg, and all other cities in the League. The end. The Hanseatic League's power was fading, and the kings nearby kept gaining more power. The League was fighting a war in England, which they eventually won, but with a high cost. Denmark started creating its own customs again, and the League was against it, but this time it was time for the Danish to win. The end was near for the Hanseatic League when they supported Gustav Vasa to become the king of Sweden to weaken Denmark's position. This worked otherwise well, but Vasa betrayed the Hanseatic League as soon as he got the title of a king. Finland. There were not many big cities in Finland. The biggest were Turku and Viipuri, which had combined population of about 3,200 citizens. This does not sound much, but back in the day you didn't live in huge apartment blocks. Mainly the cities on the coast were the most successful. By law, the peasants are only allowed to trade inside of Finland with the Finnish merchants, and then it is the merchant's job to trade it outside of Finland. But if a peasant secretly sells it without the middleman, he will get much more profit, so this was a common practice amongst peasants. Thank you for watching. Remember to like and subscribe if you want to see more.